Plastic surgery. Plastic surgery is the process of reconstructing or repairing parts of the body by the transfer of tissue, either in the treatment of injury or for cosmetic reasons. It can involve a number of different techniques to move and manipulate body tissue. In the independent healthcare sector, aesthetic surgery has increased in popularity, showing the increased consumer desire for it. Many people regard aesthetic surgery as a panacea for their personal and relationship difficulties. Active and aggressive media, which were almost absent 50 years ago, have made our society ambitious, and the media have globalized the perception of what is attractive, desirable, and sexy. Society's current obsession with looks may reflect the modern image-obsessed culture, but it can also be due to entrenched insecurities in people's psychological makeup. In the past few years, a lack of respect for ethical principles in plastic surgery has become increasingly noticeable. As the concepts of beauty undergo change, wrinkles, fat deposits and sun-damaged skin no longer fit into our concept of a neat society. Now that these real or perceived aging problems receive greater attention from patients and doctors, the ethical considerations also need to be focused upon. Enhancement versus therapy, risks, patient autonomy, beneficence and informed consent are issues that need to be reconsidered and emphasized when considering aesthetic surgery. Principles that could help guide healthcare professionals include a respect for autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence and justice. In general, competent adults have the right to decide whether they wish to undergo a surgical procedure or not. The patient's wishes and thereby their right to an informed decision have to be taken into account, provided they have been given sufficient information, which must include the risks together with alternative options. These principles apply even more to aesthetic operations, where patients are not suffering from any illness. These treatments, which may lead to long-term adverse effects on body function and health, involve serious ethical concerns. In such situations, the patient's right for autonomy may contradict the physician's principle of non-maleficence, and therefore, proper consideration is needed before deciding on such treatments. Surgeons must therefore ensure that the patient's expectations are reasonable. The beneficence principle requires that medical practitioners act in the best interests of patients. Undertaking surgery to improve a patient's self-image and esteem is acceptable. However, defining the patient's best interests can be very difficult. Many people are extremely self-conscious about their appearance, and these groups may benefit from aesthetic surgery. Body dysmorphic disorder, BDD, is a psychiatric syndrome characterized by a preoccupation with a non-existent or minimal cosmetic defect, associated with persistent attempts to have the defect surgically corrected. BDD is increasingly recognized, and may be becoming more prevalent. The principle of non-maleficence ensures that an aesthetic surgeon never acts against a patient's welfare or in a way that may harm a patient. Consultant aesthetic surgeons may decline to operate on patients if they do not believe that the surgery is to the patient's benefit. Aesthetic surgeons should be reluctant to operate on those with unrealistic expectations, as the risks of surgery may outweigh any benefits. Patients with serious health problems are also at increased risk of complications under general anesthesia, and again the risks may outweigh the benefits. All such assessments need to be made on an individual basis. In the past, there has been a perception that surgeons have a potential conflict of interest in the independent sector. No surgeon should ever proceed with an operation merely for personal pecuniary gain. All aesthetic surgeons need to take the duty of care to their patients very seriously. The justice principle requires doctors to ensure that medical care is available to all. Equitable access to healthcare is regarded by many as a basic entitlement. However, resources are limited and it is not possible for any health service to provide aesthetic surgery for all those who would like it. Rationing takes place on the basis of clinical necessity. Inevitably, this introduces subjective judgment about whose need is greater. In the private sector, those who can afford to pay undergo surgery. Requests for aesthetic surgery occur in all social classes. However, as stated earlier, because of economic considerations, there are no social systems in the world that covers aesthetic surgery, except for some particular interventions. The case of adolescence is especially problematic. The deformity, physical and emotional maturity and the desired outcome for each adolescent patient must be carefully evaluated before any decisions are made. Additional consultations and long discussions before aesthetic surgery are always necessary, and this may require expert psychological assessment. At present, aesthetic surgery is passing through an identity crisis as well as posing an acute ethical dilemma. A closer look from an ethical viewpoint makes it evident that the doctor who offers aesthetic interventions faces many serious ethical problems to do with the identity of the surgeon as a healer. Aesthetic surgery makes profit from the ideology of a society that serves only vanity, youthfulness and personal success, and one which is losing sight of the real values. The real value of a person cannot be reduced to his, her appearance, and medicine as an art should feel the obligation to resist these modern ideologies and should attempt to help people get a more realistic attitude about themselves. Plastic surgeons must resist aesthetic measures in children and adolescents, particularly operations which are totally cosmetic. Nevertheless, exceptions do exist, and convincing arguments may support aesthetic measures with children and adolescents to prevent stigmatization in selected cases.
However, while this may be credible, it cannot be jellyfish, a remarkable marine life form. When viewed in the wild, jellyfish are perhaps the most graceful and vividly colored of all sea creatures. But few people have seen a jellyfish living in its natural habitat. Instead, they might see a dead and shapeless specimen lying on the beach, or perhaps receive a painful sting while swimming. So it is inevitable that jellyfish are often considered ugly and possibly dangerous. This misunderstanding can be partly traced back to the 20th century, when the use of massive nets and mechanical winches often damaged the delicate jellyfish that scientists managed to recover. As a result, disappointingly little research was carried out into jellyfish, as marine biologists took the easy option and focused on physically stronger species such as fish, crabs, and shrimp. Fortunately, however, new techniques are now being developed. For example, scientists have discovered that sound bounces harmlessly off jellyfish, so in the Arctic and Norway researchers are using sonar to monitor jellyfish beneath the ocean surface. This, together with aeroplane surveys, satellite imagery and underwater cameras, has provided a wealth of new information in recent years. Scientists now believe that in shallow water alone there are at least 38 million tons of jellyfish, and these creatures inhabit every type of marine habitat, including deep water. Furthermore, jellyfish were once regarded as relatively solitary, but this is another area where science has evolved. Dr. Karen Hansen was the first to suggest that jellyfish are in fact the center of entire ecosystems, as shrimp, lobster, and fish shelter and feed among their tentacles. This proposition has subsequently been conclusively proven by independent studies. DNA sequencing and isotope analysis have provided further insights, including the identification of numerous additional species of jellyfish unknown to science only a few years ago. This brings us to the issue of climate change. Research studies around the world have recorded a massive growth in jellyfish populations in recent years, and some scientists have linked this to climate change. However, while this may be credible, it cannot be established with certainty as other factors might be involved. Related to this was the long-standing academic belief that jellyfish had no predators and therefore there was no natural process to limit their numbers. However, observations made by Paul Dewar and his team showed that this was incorrect. As a result, the scientific community now recognizes that species including sharks, tuna, swordfish and some salmon all prey on jellyfish. That evidence of just how sophisticated and unusual these life forms are.
It is still widely assumed that jellyfish are among the simplest life forms, as they no brain or central nervous system. While this is true, we now know they possess senses that allow them to see, feel and interact with their environment on subtle ways. What is more, analysis of so-called upside-down jellyfish shows that they shut down their bodies and rest in much the same way that humans do at night, something once widely believed to be impossible for jellyfish. Furthermore, far from floating in the water as they are still sometimes thought to do, analysis has shown jellyfish to be the most economical swimmers in the animal kingdom. In short, scientific progress in recent years has shown that many of our established beliefs about jellyfish were inaccurate. Jellyfish, though, are not harmless. Their sting can cause a serious allergic reaction in some people, and large outbreaks of them known as blooms can damage tourist businesses, break fishing nets, overwhelm fish farms and block industrial cooling pipes. On the other hand, jellyfish are a source of medical collagen used in surgery and wound dressings. In addition, a particular protein taken from jellyfish has been used in over 30,000 scientific studies of serious diseases such as Alzheimer's. Thus, our relationship with jellyfish is complex as there are a range of conflicting factors to consider. Jellyfish have existed more or less unchanged for at least 500 million years. Scientists recognize that over the planet's history there have been three major extinction events connected with changing environmental conditions. Together, these destroyed 99% of all life, but jellyfish live through all three. Research in the Mediterranean Sea has now shown, remarkably, that in old age and on the point of death, certain jellyfish are able to revert to an earlier physical state, leading to the assertion that they are immortal. While this may not technically be true, it is certainly an extraordinary discovery. What is more, the oceans today contain 30% more poisonous acid than they did 100 years ago, causing problems for numerous species, but not jellyfish, which may even thrive in more acidic waters. Jellyfish throughout their long history have shown themselves to be remarkably resilient. Studies of jellyfish in class known as Scyphozoa have shown a life cycle of 3 distinct phases. First, thousands of babies known as planulae are released. Then, after a few days the planulae develop into polyps, stationary life forms that feed off floating particles. Finally, these are transformed into something that looks like a stack of pancakes, each of which is a tiny jellyfish. It is now understood that all species of jellyfish go through similarly distinct stages of life. This is further evidence of just how sophisticated and unusual these life forms are.
Human distrust of robots that look like us. We humans have evolved to relate emotionally to non-living objects, which is strange when you think about it. Children play with dolls and toy soldiers as if they were people. Adults talk to their cars. As long as they are robot-like and mechanical, we are comfortable around them and can display affection as for an old car. But when it comes to human-like robots, something different happens. As they become more human-like, our affection disappears and we begin to feel less comfortable. Our liking turns to revulsion. Androids that look too human freak us out. This odd phenomenon is called the uncanny valley, a term coined by robotics professor Masahiro Mori. But the effect has particularly confused and puzzled engineers and scientists who design robots and interactive software. The term comes from the dip in a graph with 2 parameters, affection and human likeness. As human likeness increases, so does our affection. As soon as the resemblance becomes too great, though, affection drops below 0, hence the valley. The effect was highlighted by studies of machines such as the Geminoid F robot, created by Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro of Kyoto University. His robots have human-like bodies, but their movements, although impressively human-like, show something of the mechanism beneath their skin, and people didn't respond well to them. Making robots look human is a major goal of robotic engineers, and scientific writers have long dreamt of androids, so the uncanny valley could potentially spell the end to their dream. CV researchers have tried to find the cause of the uncanny valley. One of the most interesting insights has come from an international team led by Ace Pinar Sajan of the University of California, San Diego, UCSD. Sajan and her team conducted an experiment scanning the brains of 20 subjects aged 20-36 while they were looking at 3 different things: a human, a mechanical-looking robot, and a human-like robot. Interpreting the results from the fMRI scans, the researchers suggested that the cause for the valley is a conflict in perception between 2 processes in the brain, that of recognizing a human-like face and that of recognizing different kinds of movement. These processes or pathways meet in an area of the brain called the parietal cortex. There, information from the visual cortex relating to bodily movement is integrated with information from the motor cortex that contains mirror neurons, the brain cells that register that what we are seeing is one of us. Alarm bells go off in the brain when there is a conflict between the human-like features of the robot and its inhuman movement. This mismatch creates a feeling of revulsion similar to what we feel when looking at a movie zombie. We instinctively expect human-like creatures to have human-like movements. As Sajan says, the brain looks for its expectations to be met for appearance and motion to match. The discomfort we feel is not logical and has its roots in our evolutionary past. Researchers believe that the modern mind came into being between 60 and 40 years ago when pathways in the brain became connected, probably thanks to the evolution of language. The way we understand our world then emerged from these new connections. Robotic evolution challenges this mental software of ours. The uncanny valley seems to represent the point at which logic stops and our instincts start to react. Despite such studies, many, for example McDormand et al., believe that cultural factors also contribute to the effect. And researchers have pointed to the fact that young people who are used to technology seem less affected by the effect. Furthermore, the uncanny valley effect has been observed in our response to still photographs of humans that have been altered slightly with Photoshop software. Even as far back as the 19th century, the great naturalist Charles Darwin noticed that we react most adversely to species with eyes, nose, and mouth arranged like our own. The phenomenon may therefore be more complex than Sagan's research suggests. So, is this the end of robots as we have dreamt them? Are our brains unable to cope with mechanical doubles? Perhaps not. It may just be a temporary phenomenon. The positive response to recent androids shows that once the design and movements of robots become even more human-like, the affection graph rises again from the uncanny valley. Acceptability returns steeply to normal. We seem to be at ease with androids that have human bodies and human movements, even if we know they are not human. As we cross the uncanny valley, another basic instinct comes into play: empathy. It is possible to mix human and mechanical characteristics without getting trapped in uncanny valley. Eventually, human-like robots will make us love them too.
The case for mixed ability classes. Picture this scene. It's an English literature lesson in a UK school, and the teacher has just read an extract from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet with a class of 15-year-olds. He's given some of the students copies of No Fear Shakespeare, a kid-friendly translation of the original. For 3 students, even these literacy demands are beyond them. Another girl simply can't focus, and he gives her pens and paper to draw with. The teacher can ask the No Fear group to identify the key characters and maybe provide a tentative plot summary. He can ask most of the class about character development, and 5 of them might be able to support their statements with textual evidence. Now, 2 curious students are wondering whether Shakespeare advocates living a life of moderation or one of passionate engagement. As a teacher myself, I think my lesson would be going rather well if the discussion went as described above. But wouldn't this kind of class work better if there weren't such a huge gap between the top and the bottom? If we put all the kids who needed literacy support into one class and all the students who want to discuss the virtue of moderation into another. The practice of streaming, or tracking, involves separating students into classes depending on their diagnosed levels of attainment. At a macro level, it requires the establishment of academically selective schools for the brightest students and comprehensive schools for the rest. Within schools, it means selecting students into a stream of general ability, or sets of subject-specific ability. The practice is intuitively appealing to almost every stakeholder. I have heard the mixed ability model attacked by way of analogy: a group hike. The fittest in the group take the lead and set a brisk pace, only to have to stop and wait every 20 minutes. This is frustrating, and their enthusiasm wanes. Meanwhile, the slowest ones are not only embarrassed but physically struggling to keep up. What's worse, they never get a long enough break. They honestly just want to quit. Hiking, they feel, is not for them. Mixed ability classes bore students, frustrate parents, and bum out teachers. The brightest ones will never summit Mount Komalangma, and the stragglers won't enjoy the lovely stroll in the park they are perhaps more suited to. Individuals suffer at the demands of the collective. Mediocrity prevails. So, is learning like hiking? The current pedagogical paradigm is arguably that of constructivism, which emerged out of the work of psychologist Lev Vygotsky. In the 1930s, Vygotsky emphasized the importance of targeting a student-specific zone of proximal development. ZZ. This is the gap between what they can achieve only with support, teachers, textbooks, worked examples, parents, and so on, and what they can achieve independently. The purpose of teaching is to provide, and then gradually remove this scaffolding until they are autonomous. If we accept this model, it follows that streaming students with similar ZPDs would be an efficient and effective solution, and that forcing everyone on the same hike, regardless of aptitude, would be madness. Despite all this, there is limited empirical evidence to suggest that streaming results in better outcomes for students. Professor John Hattie, director of the Melbourne Education Research Institute, notes that tracking has minimal effects on learning outcomes. What is more, streaming appears to significantly and negatively affect those students assigned to the lowest sets. These students tend to have much higher representation of low socioeconomic class. Less significant is the small benefit for those lucky clever students in the higher sets. The overall result is that the smart stay smart and the dumb get dumber, further entrenching the social divide. In the latest update of Hattie's influential meta-analysis of factors influencing student achievement, one of the most significant factors is the teacher's estimate of achievement. Streaming students by diagnosed achievement automatically limits what the teacher feels the student is capable. Meanwhile, in a mixed environment, teachers' estimates need to be more diverse and flexible. While streaming might seem to help teachers effectively target a student's ZPD, it can underestimate the importance of peer-to-peer learning. A crucial aspect of constructivist theory is the role of the MKO, more knowledgeable other, in knowledge construction. While teachers are traditionally the MKOs in classrooms, the value of knowledgeable student peers must not go unrecognized either. I find it amazing to watch students get over an idea to their peers in ways that I would never think of. They operate with different language tools and different social tools from teachers, and, having just learned it themselves, they possess similar cognitive structures to their struggling classmates. There is also something exciting about passing on skills and knowledge that you yourself have just mastered, a certain pride and zeal. A certain freshness to the interaction between teacher and learner that is often lost by the expert for whom the steps are obvious and the joy of discovery forgotten. Having a variety of different abilities in a collaborative learning environment provides valuable resources for helping students meet their learning needs, not to mention improving their communication and social skills. And today, more than ever, we need the many to flourish, not suffer at the expense of a few bright stars. Once a year, I go on a hike with my class, a mixed bunch of students. It is challenging. The fittest students realize they need to encourage the reluctant. There are lookouts who report back, and extra items to carry for others. We make it together.
Preventing the theft of turtle eggs, humans have been eating sea turtle eggs and killing adult turtles for meat for millennia. However, as human populations exploded and as sea turtles began to confront additional threats such as intensive fishing, beach development, and climate change, sea turtle populations declined precipitously. Today, all but one of the world's 7 species of sea turtles are considered threatened according to the IUCN Red List, and the one that's not the flatback turtle is listed as data deficient, which means scientists simply don't know how it's doing. One major problem is that every year millions of sea turtle eggs are illegally taken by poachers for sale on the black market. The situation is particularly serious in Nicaragua, in Central America, which is home to 4 sea turtle species. Kim Williams-Gillen, who works for conservation body Paso Pacifico, described the poaching of sea turtle nests on the beaches of Nicaragua as uncontrolled, unregulated, extensive, and contested. Even the best protected beaches are plundered to some extent, and it's not uncommon to see poachers digging up nests just meters from tourists watching sea turtles laying their clutch at night, she said. This poaching becomes particularly frenzied during the arrobados, mass-laying events where thousands of turtles nest on the same beach for a single night in a biological strategy to overwhelm natural predators. See, even with armed guards, the numbers of poachers overwhelm military personnel by 10 to 20 to 1, Williams-Gillen said. Although many poachers are locals with limited resources, during these arrobados there are influxes of gangs of poachers from larger cities outside local communities. These are not just local poor people without other options, but to protect the country's sea turtles. Williams-Gillen said conservationists shouldn't just depend on catching low-level operators. If one poacher decides to stop, another one will just step into his place. We need to know more about the middlemen and people higher up in the distribution chain, she said. The Paso Pacifico solution is the creation of high-tech sea turtle eggs, fake eggs convincingly crafted to look like the real thing, but which contain GPS tracking devices. These have the potential to reveal the destination markets for trafficked sea turtle eggs. Making convincing sea turtle eggs is not easy, and Paso Pacifico is still working on perfecting a prototype. In particular, it's proving quite problematic to create the right texture, since sea turtle eggs are not covered in a hard shell like those of birds, but are quite flexible. So Paso Pacifico brought in Lauren Wilder, a special effects artist in the U.S., to create a convincing outer shell. First, Wilder had to get her hands on the real thing. Since it's illegal to send sea turtle eggs over the border, Wilder is using land turtle eggs from California. It was really eye-opening and important for me to feel these eggs and how the shell bends a little, she said. To get the GPS device inside the shell, Paso Pacifico is using 3D printers to make a plastic ball which will then have a GPS transmitter fitted inside. This will take the place of the embryo inside the shell. Lastly, the fake shells will be sealed with silicone, waterproofing them. These sea turtles on average lay around 100 eggs in a nest, and once the fake eggs are finished, they will be slipped in with the real ones. Williams-Gillen said it might even be possible to deliver fake eggs into nests while poachers are at work. Wary of tourists, poachers will often back off if strangers come near and then return when they have gone. It would be pretty easy to drop an egg in the dark into a nest they have been digging up, she said. Once the poacher picks up the fake egg along with the real ones, conservationists and law enforcement agents will be able to track them. Experts believe most of the stolen eggs eventually make their way out of Nicaragua, possibly to El Salvador or Guatemala. However, there is also growing concern that sea turtle eggs from Central America are actually heading to the USA, from where they are sold on to other countries around the world. To date, Paso Pacifico has yet to put a single fake egg in a nest, but Williams-Gillen said she isn't too concerned that publicity for their scheme will result in poachers looking for the eggs. The vast majority of the poaching is happening at night, so already it is hard to tell the eggs apart, and at this point, poachers and middlemen are not closely inspecting eggs, but rather shoving them into a sack as quickly as possible. Of course, poachers will eventually become aware of the prospect of fake eggs among the real ones, especially when customers try to bite into an egg and break their teeth on the GPS transmitter instead. So, Paso Pacifico plans to do a massive deployment of as many fakes as possible to gather a lot of data before poachers get wise. Knowing where the eggs go will allow conservationists and law enforcement agents to focus their resources on the right places, whether it be through awareness-building campaigns or crackdowns on illegal sellers. And eventually Paso Pacifico hopes to share the technology with interested parties around the world.
Backpacking cuckoos. The cuckoo is a bird which people all over Europe know from the sound it makes. It doesn't sing, but makes a noise with one high note and one low note. Cuckoo. People in Europe say that when you hear that sound for the first time each year, you know that spring has arrived. In some years, people hear cuckoos as early as February, and in other years they don't arrive until April. But March is the typical month for the birds to arrive. This is because the cuckoo lives in Africa during the winter months and only comes to Europe when the weather gets better. People have always known that the cuckoos migrated. They fly thousands of miles across the Sahara Desert twice a year, once in the spring, and then back again at the end of the summer, normally in July. The young cuckoos are born in England and they leave for Africa a little later. But by mid-August there are no cuckoos left in Europe. The details of how they make their incredible journey have only recently been understood by scientists. Last May, scientists caught 5 male birds in Norfolk in eastern England. They put a tiny satellite tag on each bird's back, and then set them free again. The tag allowed the scientists to see where they went when they left England. The scientists found that the 5 tagged birds all traveled about 10 miles that summer, and all spent the winter in the Congo region of Central Africa. Incredibly, the scientists discovered that the 5 birds all took different routes to reach their destination in Africa. The first bird, to which the scientists gave the name Lister, flew across France, Spain, and Morocco before crossing the Sahara Desert. The second bird, called Chris, went by a completely different route. He flew over Belgium, Germany, and Italy before crossing the Sahara Desert in Libya. Tunisia and Algeria were countries that the other 3 birds flew over on their way to Africa. The scientists were also able to see that all 5 birds left Africa again, 9 months later, to come back to Britain. Incredibly, they each took a different route again. And not only a different route from each other, but a different route from the one they had taken before. For example, Lister flew back to England via Algeria and France, but this time didn't fly over Spain and Morocco. Chris also crossed the Algerian desert, but then continued his journey via Italy and France. The 2 birds, however, both returned to the exact place in Norfolk where their satellite tags were fitted the year before. The 3 other birds did not return to England, and the scientists think they died on their return journey. Next year, the scientists are going to put satellite tags on female birds to see which route they take.
Bubbles are a small group of seabirds native to tropical and subtropical oceans throughout the world. Their diet consists mainly of fish. They are specialized fish eaters feeding on small school fish like sardines, anchovies, mackerel, and flying fish. When their prey is in sight, they fold their long wings back around their streamlined bodies and plunge into the water from as high as 80 feet, so streamlined they barely make a splash. They travel in parties of about 12 to areas of water with large schools of small fish. When the lead bird sees a fish shoal in the water, it will signal the rest of the group and they will all dive together. Surprisingly, individuals do not eat with the hunting group, preferring to eat on their own, usually in the early morning or late afternoon. There are 3 varieties on the Galapagos: the blue-footed, red-footed, and masked boobies. They are all members of the same family, and are not only different in appearance, but also in behaviors. The blue-footed and red-footed boobies mate throughout the year, while the masked boobies have an annual mating cycle that differs from island to island. All catch fish in a similar manner, but in different areas. The blue-footed booby does its fishing close to shore, while the masked booby goes slightly farther out, and the red-footed booby fishes at the farthest distances from shore. Although it is unknown where the name booby emanates from, some conjecture it may come from the Spanish word for clown, bobo, meaning stupid. Its name was probably inspired by the bird's clumsiness on land and apparently unwarranted bravery. The blue-footed booby is extremely vulnerable to human visitors because it does not appear to fear them. Therefore these birds received such name for their clumsiness on land, in which they were easy, captured, killed, and eaten by humans. The blue-footed booby's characteristic feet play a significant part in their famous courtship ceremony, the booby dance. The male walks around the female, raising his bright blue feet straight up in the air while bringing his shoulders towards the ground and crossing the bottom tips of his wings high above the ground. Plus he'll raise his bill up towards the sky to try to win his mate over. The female may also partake in these activities, lifting her feet, sky pointing, and of course, squawking at her mate. After mating, another ritual occurs: the nest building, which ironically is never used because they nest on the bare ground. When the female is ready to lay her eggs, they scrape the existing nest away so she can nest on exposed ground. Sun-baked islands form the booby's breeding grounds. When ready, the female blue-footed booby lays 1 to 3 eggs. After mating, 2 or 3 eggs are laid in a shallow depression on flat or gently sloping ground. Both male and female take turns incubating the eggs. Unlike most birds, booby doesn't develop brood patches, areas of bare skin on the breast, to warm the eggs during incubation. Instead, it uses its broad-webbed feet, which have large numbers of prominent blood vessels, to transmit heat essential for incubation. The eggs are thick-shelled so they can withstand the full weight of an incubating bird. After hatching, the male plays a major role in bringing fish home. He can bring back a constant supply of small fish for the chicks, which must be fed continuously. The reason is that the male has a longer tail than the female in relation to his body size, which makes him able to execute shallower dives and to feed closer to shore. Then the female takes a greater part as time proceeds. Sooner or later, the need to feed the young becomes greater than the need to protect them, and both adults must fish to provide enough. When times are good, the parents may successfully fledge all 3 chicks, but, in harder times, they may still lay as many eggs yet only obtain enough food to raise one. The problem is usually solved by the somewhat callous-sounding system of opportunistic sibling murder. The firstborn chick is larger and stronger than its nestmates as a result of hatching a few days earlier, and also because the parents feed the larger chick. If food is scarce, the firstborn will get more food than its nestmates and will outcompete them, causing them to starve. The above system optimizes the reproductive capacity of the bluefoot in an unpredictable environment. The system ensures that, if possible, at least one chick will survive a period of shortage rather than all 3 dying of starvation under a more humane system.
Issued by the Bank of New South Wales in 1816, police fund notes were one of the first official notes in Australia and were well circulated throughout the 19th century. Their use continued up until 1910, around which time the federal government became responsible for issuing, monitoring and controlling all currencies that were used throughout the country. Once the Australian Notes Act was passed in 1910, it took 3 years for the federal government to issue the first series of Australian notes. The government followed the British imperial system where 12 pence made a shilling and 20 shillings made a pound. The same act also stopped different states and their banks from issuing and circulating their own notes. The status of state notes as legal tender ceased from that time, resulting in the Commonwealth Treasury having full responsibility and control over issuing notes. In 1920, however, control was transferred to a board of directors directly appointed by the Commonwealth government. By the end of 1924, a number of changes took place regarding the control of note issuing, the most significant being the replacement of the Commonwealth Government Board of Directors by the Commonwealth Bank Board of Directors. Gradually, the Commonwealth Bank became the sole authority to issue Australian notes. This authority was formalised in 1945 by the Commonwealth Bank Act. In 1960, control was passed to another authority, the Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, which took over the responsibility of central banking and the issuing of notes. In 1966, the RBA converted its currency from the imperial system to decimal currency and named its standard currency the dollar. In the 1970s, Australia experienced rapid growth in its economy and population. This growth meant that more currency would need to be printed, so the RBA began the construction of a new note printing complex in Melbourne. In 1981, the first batch of notes was printed in the new complex by the printing branch of the RBA, which, in 1990, was officially named Note Printing Australia. In addition to larger-scale note printing, the RBA also concentrated on developing technologically advanced and complex note printing mechanisms to guard against counterfeiting. As a result of joint efforts by the RBA and the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, revolutionary polymer notes were invented. Featuring exclusively a pictorial theme of settlement incorporating elements of Aboriginal culture, commemorative $10 polymer notes were introduced in 1988 as part of Australia's bicentennial celebrations. In sections, electronically without physically exchanging notes or coins. The basic idea of developing polymer notes originated from an experiment where the RBA attempted to insert an optically variable device in the notes so that counterfeiters could not copy them. Over the years, a process has evolved in the production of polymer note printing, which involves several steps. Initially, blank sheets are made out of a special kind of surface material called biaxially oriented polypropylene, BOP, a non-fibrous and non-porous polymer used as an alternative to paper in note printing that has a distinctive feel when touched. Usually, a technique called opacifying is then used to apply ink to each side of the sheet through a die cut that has a sealed space in it for the OVD. No ink is placed in this area, it remains transparent. The sheet is then ready for intaglio printing, a kind of printing which sets the ink in an embossed form, raising the printed element's text, image, lines and other complicated shapes. The process then prints a see-through registration device by matching the images on both sides, dot by dot. If the images on both sides do not align perfectly, then the see-through device will not show any printing on it once the note is held up to a light source. As a special security feature, shadow image creation technique is then used by applying optically variable ink, OVI, which allows the print on the reverse side to be also seen. All the notes then undergo a safety and functionality test where they are placed in front of a light source to check manually whether or not the reverse side can be seen. If the notes pass the test, it is assumed that the process has been successful. The process then moves to microprinting, which is the printing of text so small that it can only be read with a magnifying glass. The second last phase of the process is fluorescence printing, where some texts are printed in such a way that is only visible when viewed under ultraviolet, UV, light. The authenticity of a polymer note can be quickly established by holding it up to a UV light source. If some texts glow under the UV light, then the note is authentic. The last phase of the process is called varnishing, which is the overcoating of notes with a chemical that consists of drying oil, resin, and thinner. This final phase makes the surfaces of the notes glossy and more durable. Despite significant developments of technology and control, some people argue that the life of polymer notes as currency in Australia will come to an end due to the widespread usage of electronic fund transfer cards. 1. Whether this will come to pass remains to be seen. One thing, however, seems certain: innovation of currency notes in Australia will continue into the foreseeable future. 1. Computer-based systems used to perform financial transactions electronically without physically exchanging notes or coins.
The history of cinema. The history of the cinema in its first 30 years is one of major, and to this day, unparalleled expansion and growth. Beginning as something unusual, in a handful of big cities, New York, London, Paris, and Berlin, the new medium quickly found its way across the world, attracting larger and larger audiences wherever it was shown and replacing other forms of entertainment as it did so. As audiences grew, so did the places where films were shown, finishing up with the great picture palaces of the 1920s, which rivaled, and occasionally superseded, theaters and opera houses in terms of opulence and splendor. Meanwhile, films themselves developed from being short attractions only a couple of minutes long, to the full-length feature that has dominated the world screens up to the present day. Although French, German, American, and British pioneers have all been credited with the invention of cinema, the British and the Germans played a relatively small role in its worldwide exploitation. It was above all the French, followed closely by the Americans, who were the most passionate exporters of the new invention, helping to start cinema in China, Japan, Latin America, and Russia. In terms of artistic development, it was again the French and the Americans who took the lead, though in the years before the First World War, Italy, Denmark, and Russia also played a part. In the end, it was the United States that was to become, and remain, the largest single market for films. By protecting their own market and pursuing a vigorous export policy, the Americans achieved a dominant position in the world market by the start of the First World War. The center of filmmaking had moved westwards, to Hollywood, and it was films from these new Hollywood studios that flooded onto the world's film markets in the years after the First World War, and have done so ever since. Faced with total Hollywood domination, few film industries proved competitive. The Italian industry, which had pioneered the feature film with spectacular films like I Covidisi, 1913, and Cabiria, 1914, almost collapsed. In Scandinavia, the Swedish cinema had a brief period of glory, notably with powerful epic films and comedies. Even the French cinema found itself in a difficult position. In Europe, only Germany proved industrially capable, while in the new Soviet Union and in Japan, the development of the cinema took place in conditions of commercial isolation. Hollywood took the lead artistically as well as industrially. Hollywood films appealed because they had better constructed narratives, their special effects were more impressive, and the star system added a new dimension to the screen acting. If Hollywood did not have enough of its own resources, it had a great deal of money to buy up artists and technical innovations from Europe to ensure its continued dominance over present or future competition. From early cinema, it was only American slapstick comedy that successfully developed in both short and feature format. However, during this excellent film era, animation, comedy, serials, and dramatic features continued to thrive, along with factual films or documentaries, which acquired an increasing distinctiveness as the period progressed. It was also at this time that the avant-garde film first achieved commercial success, this time thanks almost exclusively to the French and the occasional German film. Of the countries which developed and maintained distinctive national cinemas in the silent period, the most important were France, Germany, and the Soviet Union. Of these, the French displayed the most continuity, in spite of the war and post-war economic uncertainties. The German cinema, relatively insignificant in the pre-war years, exploded onto the world scene after 1919. Yet even they were both overshadowed by the Soviets after the 1917 revolution. They turned their back on the past, leaving the style of the pre-war Russian cinema to the émigrés who fled westwards to escape the revolution. The other countries whose cinemas changed dramatically are Britain, which had an interesting but undistinguished history in the silent period, Italy, which had a brief moment of international fame just before the war, the Scandinavian countries, particularly Denmark, which played a role in the development of silent cinema quite out of proportion to their small population, and Japan, where a cinema developed based primarily on traditional theatrical and, to a lesser extent, other art forms, and only gradually adapted to Western influence.
The penny black? It might not have looked very impressive, But the penny black, now 170 years old, was the first stamp to be created, and it launched the modem postal system in Britain. Before 1840 and the arrival of the penny black, you had to be rich and patient to use the Royal Mail. Delivery was charged according to the miles traveled and the number of sheets of paper used. A 2-page letter sent from Edinburgh to London, for example, would have cost 2 shillings, or more than £7 in today's money. And when the top-hatted letter carrier came to deliver it, it was the recipient who had to pay for the postage. Letter writers employed various ruses to reduce the cost, doing everything possible to cram more words onto a page. Nobody bothered with heavy envelopes. Instead, letters would be folded and sealed with wax. You then had to find a post office, there were no pillar boxes, and hope your addressee didn't live in one of the several rural areas which were not served by the system. If you were lucky, your letter would arrive, it could take days, without being read or censored. The state of mail had been causing concern throughout the 1830s, but it was Rowland Hill, an inventor, teacher and social reformer from Kidderminster, who proposed a workable plan for change. Worried that a dysfunctional, costly service would stifle communication just as Britain was in the swing of its second industrial revolution. He believed reform would ease the distribution of ideas and stimulate trade and business, delivering the same promise as the new railways. Hill's proposal for the penny post, which meant any letter weighing less than half an ounce, 14 grams, could be sent anywhere in Britain for about thirtip in today's money, was so radical that the Postmaster General, Lord Lichfield, said, "Of all the wild and visionary schemes which I ever heard of, it is the most extravagant." Lord Lichfield spoke for an establishment not convinced of the need for poor people to post anything. But merchants and reformers backed Hill. Soon the government told him to make his scheme work. And that meant inventing a new type of currency. Hill quickly settled on a bit of paper covered at the back with a glutinous wash, which the user might, by applying a little moisture, attach to the back of a letter. Stamps would be printed in sheets of 240 that could be cut using scissors or a knife. Perforations would not arrive until 1854. The idea stuck, and in August 1839 the Treasury launched a design competition open to all artists, men of science and the public in general. The new stamp would need to be resistant to forgery, and so it was a submission by one Mr. Cheverton that Hill used as the basis for one of the most striking designs in history. Cheverton, who worked as a sculptor and an engineer, determined that a portrait of Queen Victoria, engraved for a commemorative coin when she was a 15-year-old princess, was detailed enough to make copying difficult and recognizable enough to make fakes easy to spot. The words postage and 1 penny were added alongside flourishes and ornamental stars. Nobody thought to add the word Britain, as it was assumed the stamps would solely be put to domestic use. With the introduction of the new postal system, the penny black was an instant hit, and printers struggled to meet demand. By the end of 1840, more than 160 million letters had been sent, more than double the previous year. It created more work for the post office, whose reform continued with the introduction of red letter boxes, new branches and more frequent deliveries, even to the remotest address. But its lasting impact on society was more remarkable. Hill and his supporters rightly predicted that cheaper post would improve the diffusion of knowledge. Suddenly, someone in Scotland could be reached by someone in London within a day or two. And as literacy improved, sections of society that had been disenfranchised found a voice. Tristram Hunt, an historian, values the flourishing of correspondence that followed the arrival of stamps. While I was writing my biography of Friedrich Engels, I could read the letters he and Marx sent between Manchester and London, he says. They wrote to each other 3 times a day, pinging ideas back and forth so that you can almost follow a real-time correspondence. The penny post also changed the nature of the letter. Weight-saving tricks such as cross-writing began to die out, while the arrival of envelopes built confidence among correspondents that mail would not be stolen or read. And so people wrote more private things, politically or commercially sensitive information or love letters. In the early days of the penny post, there was still concern about theft. Hunt says, Engels would still send Marx money by ripping up 5-pound notes and sending the pieces in different letters. But the probity of the postal system became a great thing, and it came to be expected that your mail would not be tampered with. For all its brilliance, the penny black was technically a failure. At first, post offices used red ink to cancel stamps, so that they could not be used again. But the ink could be removed. When in 1842, It was determined that black ink would be more robust. The color of the penny black became a sort of browny red, but Hill's brainchild had made its mark.